There's a secret graveyard in boxing where the most devastating tactics of all time have been buried and forgotten. We're talking about strategies that once turned average fighters into world champions, techniques so powerful they changed the sport forever. The bolo punch that left opponents confused and concussed. The crossarm defense that made legends nearly untouchable. The peekaboo style that created the most feared heavyweight in history. However, here's the controversial truth. These game-changing strategies didn't disappear because they stopped working. They vanished because modern boxing forgot how to teach them, and the fighters brave enough to master them became extinct themselves. Number 5. The bolo punch gets its name from the Filipino machete used to cut sugarcane. Severino Garcia developed this technique by mimicking the exact motion he used cutting crops in the Philippines. Picture a massive sweeping circular motion that looks like a softball windup, except at the end comes an uppercut hook hybrid that would knock you senseless. Kid Galavan, the Cuban welterweight champion from 1951 to 54, made this punch legendary. He claimed he perfected it cutting sugarcane in Cuba with a machete. He held the welterweight title for 3 years, defending it 7 times, and the punch was such a spectacle that crowds would go wild watching him wind up. The genius? It wasn't about power, it was psychological warfare. While one arm did this exaggerated circular motion, Galavan would sneak devastating shots with his other hand because opponents couldn't take their eyes off the windmill. The controversial part? Boxing purists hated it. They called it showboating, but Galavan went 108-30 with 28 knockouts using a technique serious boxers dismissed. Sugar Ray Leonard brought it back briefly in the 80s to taunt Roberto Duran, and Roy Jones Jr. would occasionally throw it to mess with people's heads. Today, almost never seen. Why extinct? Modern boxing became obsessed with efficiency. Coaches drill fighters to eliminate unnecessary movement. The bolo punch, with its theatrical windup, became seen as wasted energy. Plus, video analysis killed it. Once opponents could study footage frame by frame, they stopped falling for it. Boxing got too smart, trading artistry for analytics. But people forget, Galavan used this inefficient technique to beat Carmen Basilio, one of the toughest fighters of the 50s, and Bo Jack, a former lightweight champion. The bolo punch worked at the highest level, but modern boxing decided it looked too much like having fun. But the bolo punch wasn't even the most defensive extinct strategy. Wait until you hear about the technique that made one boxer literally untouchable for over a decade. Number 4. Archie Moore was a problem nobody in boxing could solve for 27 years. The man fought professionally from 1936 to 1963, held the light heavyweight title for nearly a decade, and racked up 131 knockouts, the all-time record. His secret weapon? A defensive stance so bizarre it looked like he was giving himself a hug. The crossarm defense, which Moore called the lock, was genius in its simplicity. Moore would cross his right arm over his face, hand on his left shoulder, protecting his jawline and leaving only the hard skull exposed. His left arm covered his torso, protecting the liver, spleen, and solar plexus. But this wasn't static. Moore would bob, weave, duck, and change levels while maintaining this fortress, making his head and weapons disappear behind his shoulders. The controversial fact? Moore didn't invent this. It dates back to bare-knuckle boxing in the 1800s, taught to him by trainer Hiawatha Gray, an actual bare-knuckle fighter. In the bare-knuckle era, hitting elbows and forearms broke your hand. When Moore adapted it for gloved boxing, he created something that looked archaic, but was ahead of its time. What made it devastating? Moore would hide his weapons behind his shell, then explode with punches from angles opponents couldn't see. He'd turn his body, duck low, roll under punches, and suddenly a left hook or right uppercut materialized from nowhere. Rocky Marciano described fighting Moore as being all gloves, arms, and elbows. Moore taught this to George Foreman. When Foreman made his comeback at age 45, he used Moore's crossarm defense to become the oldest heavyweight champion in history, knocking out Michael Moorer. Foreman credited this extinct style with extending his career by a decade. Why did it die? It requires incredible upper body strength to keep your arms raised for 12 rounds. Most fighters got too tired. Second, it leaves you vulnerable to uppercuts and body shots without Moore's supernatural ability to change levels. Modern trainers looked at the weaknesses instead of the strengths. Archie Moore went 199, 26, and 8 in 229 fights, only stopped 7 times in a 27-year career. The crossarm defense worked. We just stopped believing in it. You think the crossarm defense was complicated? Wait until you see the style that required fighters to practically live in the gym just to make it functional. Number 3. The boxing strategy so demanding it basically died with the one man who truly mastered it, Mike Tyson. The peekaboo style wasn't just a fighting technique, it was a complete philosophical system created by Cus D'Amato that turned a troubled Brooklyn kid into the youngest heavyweight champion in history. What made it unique? Instead of the traditional stance with your body at a 45-degree angle, peekaboo squared you up nearly straight on. Hands glued to your cheeks, elbows tight, and you moved in constant bobbing and weaving. D'Amato called it tight defense, and the point was getting inside your opponent's range where a shorter fighter had the advantage, then unleashing explosive power punches. The mind-blowing fact, D'Amato got inspired by Goju-ryu karate, specifically their defensive movements. He combined that with his study of fear and intimidation, creating a system about psychological domination. D'Amato would train fighters to make opponents feel hunted. Floyd Patterson was the first to master it, winning Olympic gold and becoming the youngest heavyweight champion in 1956 at age 21. Jose Torres won the light heavyweight title using it, but Mike Tyson perfected it. At his peak, Tyson was a natural disaster. His head movement was so unpredictable that opponents couldn't track where he'd be. He'd weave under a jab, explode forward, and your lights were out. The truth? Peekaboo only worked for fighters with very specific attributes. You needed to be shorter than your opponents. You needed explosive leg power to constantly bob and weave for 12 rounds. You needed Tyson's hand speed and knockout power. And you needed someone like Cuz D'Amato drilling you 8 hours a day until movements became unconscious. D'Amato died in November 1985, a year before Tyson won the title at age 20. When Tyson's career fell apart in the early 90s, partly from losing trainers who understood the system, Peekaboo died with him. Modern fighters try imitating it, but they're copying the hand position without understanding the footwork or psychological warfare. The style went extinct because it's too hard. Modern boxing wants plug-and-play systems. Peekaboo required finding a once-in-a-generation talent and spending years molding it. Nobody has the patience anymore. But even the Peekaboo style doesn't come close to the most controversial extinct strategy in boxing history, one that only worked once, but changed the sport forever. Number 2. October 30th, 1974, Kinshasa, Zaire, 60,000 people packed into a stadium at 4:30 a.m. to watch what everyone thought would be a massacre. Muhammad Ali, 32 and past his prime, was facing George Foreman, the 25-year-old knockout artist who demolished Joe Frazier in 2 rounds. Ali was a 4-1 underdog. His trainer, Angelo Dundee, thought he might get seriously hurt. Then Ali did something so crazy it's still talked about 50 years later. He invented the rope-a-dope. From round 2 onward, Ali stopped moving like everyone expected. Instead, he backed against the ropes, crossed his arms, and just let George Foreman punch him. For 7 rounds, Foreman threw bombs that would have knocked out anyone else, and Ali leaned back into those ropes, absorbing the impact, blocking most shots, occasionally firing back with quick counters to Foreman's increasingly puffy face. Here's the genius nobody understood. Ali had trained for this. During sparring, he'd let training partners tee off on him while he leaned against the ropes, conditioning his body to take punishment. People thought he was lazy in training. He was actually preparing to revolutionize boxing strategy. The physics are brilliant. When you're standing in the center of the ring and take a body shot, your torso, legs, and spine absorb all the force. But when you're leaning on the ropes themselves absorb and distribute huge portions of the impact. Norman Mailer explained that Ali was using the ring itself as a defensive tool. Plus, here's the controversial part. There's evidence Angelo Dundee might have loosened the ring ropes before the fight. Dundee denied it for decades, claiming the Zaire heat naturally loosened them. But either way, those ropes were Ali's secret weapon. By round 8, Foreman was exhausted. He'd thrown hundreds of punches, landing maybe a quarter cleanly, and was running on empty. That's when Ali came off the ropes and unleashed a combination that sent Foreman stumbling to the canvas. The referee stopped it. Ali reclaimed the heavyweight championship through sheer tactical brilliance. Why extinct? Because it only worked once. It required perfect conditions, loose ropes, an aggressive opponent who'd tire himself out, and a fighter tough enough to absorb hundreds of punches. After Ali, everyone knew about it, and honestly, it was incredibly dangerous. Later in Ali's career, taking so many shots probably contributed to his neurological issues. Manny Pacquiao tried a version against Miguel Cotto in 2009, and it worked for 1 round. Boxing fundamentally changed how fights were fought. Number 1. Here's a style so extinct most boxing fans under 40 don't even know it existed. The stationary slugger. Watch fights from the 20s through 50s and you'll see something alien to modern boxing. Fighters would plant their feet in the center of the ring and just stand there, trading punches until someone dropped. No dancing around, no lateral movement, no rope work. Just 2 men deciding who could hit harder and take more punishment. Jack Dempsey practically built his career on this approach. He'd march forward, plant his feet, and throw bombs until his opponent either went down or quit. Rocky Marciano, the only heavyweight champion to retire undefeated at 49-0, was the ultimate stationary slugger. He'd walk through punches like mosquito bites, get to his preferred mid-range distance, and start throwing haymakers until the other guy collapsed. In his 1952 fight with Jersey Joe Walcott for the heavyweight title, Marciano got knocked down in the first round, got up, marched forward like a Terminator, and eventually knocked Walcott unconscious in the 13th round with one of the most devastating right hands in boxing history. What made this work in that era? Conditioning was different. Fighters didn't have the sports science, nutrition, or training methods we have today. Moving around for 15 rounds was exhausting, so planting your feet and conserving energy made sense. Plus, referees allowed much more clinching and holding. If you got tired, you could grab your opponent and rest. That doesn't fly in modern boxing, where referees break clinches immediately. The other factor, crowd expectations. 1950s boxing fans wanted to see two warriors stand and trade. They booed fighters who moved too much, called them cowards. Promoters knew that stationary slugfests sold tickets, so that's what fighters delivered. It wasn't the most strategic approach, but it was the most marketable. Why did it die? Muhammad Ali killed it. When Ali burst onto the scene in the 60s with his float like a butterfly, sting like a bee movement-based style, he proved you could be a heavyweight and still move like a smaller fighter. He made the stationary slugger look outdated, slow, predictable. Then Sugar Ray Leonard, Tommy Hearns, and the Four Kings era of the 80s made movement and speed the standard. By the 90s, staying stationary became a death sentence against fighters with modern footwork. The final nail? Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. As we learn more about brain damage, the idea of just standing still and letting someone hit you in the head 800 times became medically insane. Modern fighters are taught to minimize the punches they take, which means constant movement. The stationary slugger died because we realized it was basically assisted suicide, but here's what we lost: the raw primal drama of two warriors meeting in the center of the ring and testing each other's will. Modern boxing is more strategic, more scientific, probably safer, but those old fights had a gladiatorial intensity you just don't see anymore. Rocky Marciano used to intentionally let opponents punch him in the arms to wear their hands down, a tactic that sounds insane until you remember he retired undefeated. The stationary slugger is extinct, and it should be, but man, those fighters were built different. Every one of these strategies died for different reasons: efficiency, safety, evolution, or simply because modern boxing forgot how to teach them. The bolo punch became too theatrical, the crossarm defense too exhausting, the peekaboo too specialized, the rope-a-dope too dangerous, and the stationary slugger too damaging. But here's the thing, each of these tactics was created by someone who refused to accept boxing's limitations, who saw the sport differently and changed it forever. Today's fighters stand on the shoulders of those innovators, even if they've forgotten their names. If you want to watch our breakdown of the greatest punch combinations ever thrown, click the link in the description, and if you're serious about boxing knowledge, hit that subscribe button, because we've got way more deep dives coming. Thanks for watching.